The restaurant was filled with soft music, warm lights, and people dressed in expensive clothes. It was a special night for many. Some celebrated birthdays, others shared business deals. But at one small corner table near the window, a quiet couple sat holding hands. Rafiq and Noor looked simple. He wore a clean but old shirt, and she wore a faded pink dress. Their eyes were filled with love, not money. It was their anniversary, and they had saved 4 weeks just to afford this one. Rafiq had even ordered a small heart-shaped cake for Noor. The waiter placed it gently on the table. Noor's eyes sparkled. "It's perfect," she whispered. Rafiq smiled. "You deserve more, but this is all I could manage." Noor shook her head. "This is enough. You are enough." They held hands and laughed softly, lost in their own little world. At a nearby table, a man watched him. His name was Samir. He wore a shiny watch, an expensive suit, and a face full of pride. He was a regular customer, always loud, always demanding attention. Tonight, he was with 2 of his business friends. They laughed loudly, ordered the most expensive dishes, and poured glasses of wine like water. When Samir saw Rafiq light a small candle on the cake, he leaned toward his friends. "Look at that," he said loudly. "A birthday party at a 5-star hotel for just 1 candle and a dry cake?" His friends laughed. Noor heard it, but she said nothing. Rafiq lowered his eyes. He didn't want to create a scene. Samir stood up and walked toward their table. "Hey, you two, are you lost? This isn't a tea shop." Rafiq stood up politely. "We're not lost, just here for dinner." Samir looked him up and down. "Dinner? With what money?" Noor's face turned red. People began to look. Waiters stopped walking. The room grew quiet. "Look at this," Samir shouted. "Poor people trying to act rich. He probably borrowed money just to buy that cake." Rafiq tried to stay calm. "We don't want trouble. Please let us be." But Samir wasn't done. He took a few notes from his wallet and threw them on their table. "Here, enjoy a better dessert. Or maybe get a new dress for your wife. That one looks older than this restaurant." Noor's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to leave. Rafiq clenched his fists, but held them back. Everyone was watching. Even the restaurant manager stood frozen. Nobody said a word to stop Samir. Rafiq looked into Noor's eyes. "Let's go." They began to leave. Samir laughed behind them. "Come again next year. Maybe by then you'll afford water." As they reached the door, Noor turned and looked back at him. Her voice was soft but firm. "One day, you'll eat your own words, and no one will laugh with you." Samir smirked. "I'll wait for that day." They walked out into the night, leaving behind the cake, the shame, and the silent crowd. Outside, Noor wiped her tears. "I didn't care about the money, but the way he looked at us like we were dirt. Double quotes. Rafiq hugged her gently. "I know, but I promise you, this is not the end of our story." A car passed by, and someone inside had seen the whole thing through. The restaurant glass. A man in the back seat made a call. "I found someone, a man who knows how to stay calm under fire. Let's meet him." That night, Samir returned to his home, proud of himself. People like them don't belong in places like that, he told himself. He checked his phone, smiled at new investment alerts, and slept peacefully. But he had no idea that the man he mocked would soon become a name he'd never forget. The next morning, Rafiq was at his small mechanic shop, fixing an old car. He was still thinking about last night. A man in a suit walked in. "Are you Rafiq?" he asked. Rafiq stood up, wiping oil from his hands. "Yes, sir. Can I help you?" The man smiled. "My boss wants to meet you. He saw something in you. Something rare." Rafiq was confused. "Why me?" The man handed him a card. "Because you stayed strong when most people would break. That's leadership." Rafiq looked at the card. It was from a private firm, well-known but mysterious. He showed it to Noor that evening. "Should I go?" he asked. Noor looked at him proudly. "Yes, maybe this is where things start to change." At the same time, Samir was in his office, signing deals, shouting orders, and making more enemies. He didn't remember Rafiq's name. To him, that night had passed like a joke. But to the universe, it was a moment of truth. A moment that would return. With interest? Samir didn't know that a file had just been opened in a quiet office. A file with his name, his record, and a list of everything he had done to people below him. And at the top of that file, written in bold red letters, were 2 words. Observation begins. And thus, Karma began her slow, silent walk toward Samir's door. Samir arrived at his office the next morning with his usual pride. His staff stood as he entered, but their eyes no longer showed respect. They feared him, not admired him. He liked it that way. He believed power was not given, it was taken. He walked into his glass cabin, threw his coat on the chair, and opened his laptop. His inbox was full, but one email stood out. It had no sender name, no subject line. Curious, he clicked it. A blank screen appeared, followed by a single sentence. "Humiliation returns with quiet steps." Samir frowned. He closed the laptop and looked out the window, brushing it off as a prank. But somewhere deep inside he felt something shift. Meanwhile, Rafiq sat in a small but neat office. Across from him sat Mr. Zubair, the same man whose assistant had visited Rafiq's workshop. Zubair was calm, his eyes sharp. "Tell me something, Rafiq," he said. "Why didn't you say anything that night in the restaurant?" Rafiq paused, thinking because it would have made me like him. I've seen pride break people. I didn't want to be broken like that. Zubair nodded slowly. That's exactly why we want you. We need someone with heart. Someone who doesn't shout to be heard. Rafiq listened carefully. Zubair continued. We work with people who've been left behind, help them rise. But we also observe those who push others down. People like Samir. Rafiq looked up. You know him? Zubair smiled. He doesn't know us, but we know many like him. By evening, Rafiq had been given a new role, project manager for a startup funding unit. His job was to find small businesses and support them. It was a big jump from fixing cars, but Rafiq wasn't afraid. He had learned to build things slowly, with patience. Noor, too, had started something small. She began selling homemade food, online simple meals cooked with care. Within days, people started talking. There's something in this food, they'd say. It feels like home. Noor smiled when she heard the feedback. It's not just food, she would say. It's love with a little salt. Back in Samir's world, cracks had begun to form. His investors were growing restless. A sudden complaint had been filed against one of his factories. Environmental issues, they said. Nothing serious, Samir told his team. Just handle it. But when they checked, it was more than serious. The factory was leaking waste into nearby water sources. A journalist had already gotten the story. Samir shouted at his staff, slammed files, and threatened lawsuits, but the story aired anyway. A billionaire's dirty secret. The headline read. Samir's face was on screen, along with angry voices from villagers whose water had turned black. For the first time, Samir felt real, fear not from outside, but from inside. His mask of power was slipping. The next day, his lawyer informed him that 2 investors had pulled out. AID, they say your name brings risk now. The lawyer said. Samir was shocked. Risk? I built the city. But the lawyer didn't argue. That's what every fallen king says. That night, Samir drank alone in his mansion. He looked around at the gold frames, the soft lights, the silence. It all felt colder now. He remembered Noor's words at the restaurant door. One day you'll eat your own words. He poured another glass, but it tasted bitter. Rafiq and Noor were unaware of all this. They were busy with their work. Rafiq's new team respected him, and Noor's online kitchen was getting daily orders. One evening, Noor received an invite to a local food fair. It was a competition for new chefs and home businesses. Rafiq encouraged her to go. People should taste what I get every day, he said with a grin. Noor blushed, but agreed. She prepared her best dishes and practiced her presentation. Little did she know, the event was being sponsored by a company owned by Samir. Samir, trying to clean his image, had agreed to judge the food fair. Public events, charity shows, that's how you win hearts again, his PR team advised. He hated the idea, but he needed to look soft. On the day of the event, Samir arrived wearing a fake smile and a camera-ready suit. He shook hands, gave short speeches, and sat at the judges' table. One by one, participants came forward with their food, told their stories, and left. Then came Noor. She stood with her tray of warm, fresh food. She introduced herself calmly. My name is Noor. I believe food should heal people, not just fill them. Samir looked up, and for a second, his heart froze. He recognized her, the woman from that night. The poor dress, the small cake, the silent strength. She didn't look away. She held his gaze and placed her tray in front of him. Please enjoy, she said. Samir didn't move. He didn't speak. His hands stayed still. Around him, others took bites, nodded, and smiled. Delicious, one of the judges said. Simple, but rich in soul. Samir finally picked up a spoon and tasted her food. He expected it to be average, but something about it hit him deep. It reminded him of something he hadn't felt in years. Humility. When he looked up, Noor was already walking away. She didn't wait for his approval. She didn't need it. Samir couldn't sleep that night. He sat alone in his dark room. The trophy Noor had won still fresh in his mind. Her calm voice echoed in his ears. She had spoken without hate, without pride, but her words had cut deeper than any insult. He stared at the glass of water in his hand, then threw it across the room. It shattered against the wall, just like his confidence. His mind drifted back to the past, to the dusty streets where his journey had started. Long before the fancy cars and five-star hotels, Samir had been a boy from a poor neighborhood. His father worked in a garage, and his mother stitched clothes for people in the colony. They lived in a small room where water leaked from the ceiling, and the fan worked only sometimes. But even in that struggle, there was warmth. His parents taught him values: kindness, hard work, and honesty. But Samir had hated poverty. He hated the feeling of wearing old shoes to school and being laughed at by rich boys. One day, after a school function, he stood outside the gate, while other kids were picked up in big cars. His father arrived late, sweating, on a bicycle. That day, something inside Samir broke. He decided that he would never be poor again. But as he grew up, that hunger turned into something else. He studied hard, got a scholarship, and entered the world of business. In college, he met men who taught him shortcuts. He followed them. Deals became lies. Partnerships became traps. He made money fast, but lost pieces of his soul each time. He pushed people down to rise higher, and somewhere along the way, He forgot what it meant to be human. Samir stared at an old photo on his desk, his mother smiling, holding his school books. She died years ago, before he became rich. If she had lived to see what he had become, would she have smiled the same way? Meanwhile, Rafiq was rising slowly but steadily. He worked hard in his new job, visiting small businesses, listening to their stories, and offering support. His team respected him not for his title, but for his honesty. One day, a young man in his team asked, "Sir, you always speak so calmly. Don't you ever get angry?" Rafiq smiled. "I get angry, but I learned long ago that shouting doesn't make people listen. Respect does." That evening, Rafiq visited Nur's new kitchen space. With the prize money from the food fair, she had rented a small but clean room where she cooked her meals. The walls were painted soft yellow, and the smell of spices filled the air. "It's beautiful," Rafiq said. Nur nodded. "And it's just the beginning." Across the city, Samir received more bad news. Another investor had backed out, this time because of the environmental case. His lawyer told him, "They say your name is too risky now. Your public image is damaged." Samir slammed his desk. "I don't care about image. Fix it." But no one could fix it. Reputation wasn't like money. It couldn't be bought back once lost. He tried to start a new project under a fake company name, but word got out. His old business partner stopped answering his calls. Samir realized he was becoming what he once feared most: irrelevant. One night he walked through the same street where he had grown up. It had changed. The houses were still small, but the people smiled more. He passed by the same garage where his father used to work. A boy was fixing a bicycle, humming a song. Samir watched from the shadows that used to be him. Young, hopeful, unbroken. He wanted to speak to the boy, but instead, he turned away. He didn't belong there anymore, not as the man he had become. The next morning, Noor received an offer from a major online food platform. They wanted to feature her meals and promote her brand. She couldn't believe it. She and Rafiq celebrated with tea and a silent prayer. "You've worked hard," Rafiq told her. "You deserve every bit of this." Noor smiled, but her eyes held something else. "I don't want revenge, Rafiq. I just want peace." He nodded. "Peace is the best revenge." That same day, a charity event was announced. It would include a panel of judges, local entrepreneurs, and stories of inspiration. Noor's name was included as a guest speaker. Samir also received an invitation. His name was no longer on the main list. He had been moved to a small panel, not as a leader, but just another face. His ego was hurt, but he accepted. Maybe some respect could still be saved. When the event began, Noor stood on stage and spoke about her journey. She didn't mention Samir, didn't speak of the humiliation, but her words carried weight. Sometimes, people will try to break you, not with hands, but with words. But if you hold your silence and keep walking, life will speak for you louder than they ever could. The room applauded. Rafiq watched from the crowd, his heart full of pride. After the event, the crowd gathered around Noor, asking questions and taking pictures. She smiled politely and answered them with grace. Rafiq stood nearby, watching with quiet pride as she handled the attention with humility. On the other side of the hall, Samir stood silently near a pillar, his hands in his pockets, his eyes following every move Noor made. For the first time he realized how much respect truly meant. It wasn't something you could buy or demand. It had to be earned, and it was clear Noor had earned every bit of it. Samir left early without speaking to anyone. His car rolled through the quiet streets as he stared out the window, lost in thought. His driver broke the silence. "Sir, should I take you to the office?" Samir shook his head. "No, just home." He wasn't ready to face his empty office or the cold stares from his staff. That night, he sat on his balcony, the city lights glowing below him. He thought of his past decisions, the people he had stepped on, the friendships he had used, and the faces he had forgotten. Noor's voice kept echoing in his mind. Life will speak louder than they ever could. The next morning, Samir walked into his office only to find a group of men in suits waiting for him. His secretary looked nervous. "Sir, they're from the audit department?" Samir raised an eyebrow. "Audit? Why?" One of the men stepped forward. "Mr. Samir, we've received an anonymous complaint about financial mismanagement in your company. We need to go through your files." Samir's face turned cold. "You think I'm stealing from my own company?" The man replied calmly. "We're just following orders." Samir had no choice but to let them in. As they opened files, checked computers, and made notes, Samir sat in his cabin, trying to hold back his frustration. He called his lawyer. "Handle this now. I want it gone by evening." But the lawyer only sighed. "It's not that simple anymore." Meanwhile, Rafiq was in a meeting room presenting a new project idea to support small vendors in the city. His voice was calm but confident. His team listened with interest. Mr. Zubair smiled from the head of the table. "Rafiq, this is exactly what we need. Simple, honest ideas that help real people." Rafiq nodded. "They don't need much. Just a little help, a little faith." After the meeting, one of the senior partners approached him. "You used to be a mechanic, right?" Rafiq smiled. "Still am at heart." The man nodded with respect. "We need more people like you in leadership." Noor's food business was also growing. Orders were coming in from new places. Her small kitchen had now become a team of 5 women. Each of them had their own story, their own pain, but in Nur's kitchen, they found purpose. She named the business Nur, which meant light, because even a small light can break deep darkness. She told one of the reporters who came to write about her. The article was published under the title, The Woman Who Served Kindness on a Plate. Read the article while sitting in his office, still under audit. Each word felt like a mirror to his past actions. He closed the paper and leaned back in his chair. His phone buzzed. It was his assistant. Sir, one of our top clients has canceled the contract. They said they no longer want to be associated with your brand. Samir's jaw tightened. Who told them to say that? The assistant replied nervously. They said they saw the news about the factory pollution case. Their legal team advised them to cut ties. Samir slammed the phone down, one loss after another. It felt like the walls were closing in. That night he tried to reach out to some of his old partners, but none of them answered. The ones who picked up spoke with distance in their voice. Things are a bit sensitive right now, Samir. Maybe it's best we don't meet for a while. He realized he was becoming untouchable, not because of power, but because of disgrace. The next day, Noor received a special invite. A well-known startup organization wanted her to mentor young women who were planning to start their own food businesses. She was shocked. Me, a mentor? She asked Rafiq. He smiled. You've been one all along. Now the world just noticed. Noor accepted. Her story was now being shared in magazines, online platforms, and even on local TV. One evening, a reporter asked her if she had any enemies. Noor simply replied, people are not our enemies. Pain is, and if we don't heal it, we pass it to others. Samir saw that interview too. He watched it alone on his laptop late at night. He saw the woman he once humiliated now inspiring thousands, and she hadn't once spoken his name. She didn't need to. Her eyes spoke louder than his fall. His phone rang. It was the PR manager. Sir, your reputation is in serious danger. We suggest you make a public apology, something that shows change. Samir's pride resisted. Apologize to the media. But deep down he knew it was the right move. He spent the next few days avoiding people and writing his speech. But no words sounded right. Nothing felt honest because he still didn't understand what real apology meant. He was trying to save his image, not his soul. And that's when it hit him. Samir stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie for the charity business expo. His eyes were tired and the lines on his face deeper than before. The fall had been quick, but the recovery felt impossible. The public apology his team had pushed, for it never happened. He couldn't bring himself to say sorry for something he didn't fully understand. Instead, he hoped that showing up at charity events would slowly clean his image. This one was important. Many rising entrepreneurs would attend, including Noor. Her name was now being mentioned in business circles as an inspiration. Samir didn't want to meet her again, but he also knew avoiding her would look weak. He had no choice. At the event, the hall was decorated with lights and posters of new small businesses. Samir entered with 2 staff members, cameras flashing in his direction. He wore his best smile, but deep inside he felt small. People shook hands, took selfies, and moved on. Not long ago, people used to wait in line just to talk to him. Now they barely made eye contact. He moved toward the judging area where he was told he'd be evaluating the next set of food startups. His heart sank when he saw Noor standing at the presentation table, her face calm and graceful. She greeted the judges with a gentle nod and introduced her team of women. We are Nur Kitchen, and we believe food heals. Every meal we cook carries a story of survival and hope, she shared. Her journey, how she started with one stove in a one-room home, and how today, she was helping 5 other women become financially independent. The room was silent. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. When it came time for the judges to taste the food, Samir hesitated. He didn't know if he could look her in the eye. But Noor placed the plate in front of him anyway without a word. He tasted it, and was immediately reminded of his childhood. Simple spices, warm flavors, and something deeper, a sense of home. Noor didn't wait for feedback. She moved on to greet others. One of the judges leaned toward Samir. Incredible. You can feel the love in this food. Samir nodded silently. He knew. He felt it too. After the event, Noor's team was announced as the winner. The hall erupted in applause. Cameras flashed as she walked up to collect the trophy. Samir was expected to hand it to her. Their eyes met for a brief second. Noor took the trophy from his hands with a small smile. Thank you, she said politely. Samir opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. She didn't wait for him to try. She turned and walked away with her team. Later that evening, Samir sat alone in a back room of the venue. He stared at the empty glass in front of him and replayed everything in his head. He realized that she hadn't just won the award. She had won something far greater, the respect of people. Something he had once owned and lost. He knew now that respect wasn't about success. It was about how you made others feel. And he had made too many people feel small for too long. Meanwhile, Rafiq had stayed away from the event. He wanted Noor to shine on her own. He waited at home, setting up candles and cooking her favorite dish to celebrate her win. When she returned, her eyes were full of light. We won, she said quietly. Rafiq hugged her. Of course you did. You carry the strength of 100 voices. They ate together and spoke about the future. Noor had been offered a chance to expand Nur Kitchen into other cities. She wanted to use that opportunity to train more women. No one should ever feel worthless just because they were born poor, she said. Rafiq agreed. Dignity doesn't need money, it needs belief. Across the city, Samir got into his car and told his driver to take him to an old address, the restaurant where it all started. The place looked the same soft lights, the same music, but something inside him felt different. He walked in alone and requested the same corner table where Rafiq and Noor once sat. The waiter looked confused. That's not our VIP section, sir. Samir shook his head. I don't want VIP tonight. He sat quietly, remembering how he had humiliated the couple years ago. Now he sat in their place, feeling the same sting of silence. The same waiter who had served them back then now came to take his order. The man recognized Samir but didn't say anything. He took the order and walked away. When the food came, Samir took one bite and stopped. Tears welled up in his eyes. It wasn't the taste, it was the memory. For the first time he wished he had walked away that night instead of staying too hurt to good people. In the days that followed, Noor received more offers. Her kitchen team had been invited to speak at a national conference. A television channel wanted to document their journey. Rafiq continued working quietly, helping small vendors register their businesses and providing legal advice. The couple didn't chase fame, it came to them naturally because of the way they lifted others. Samir, on the other hand, stayed in the background. He stopped appearing at events and stayed away from cameras. He began visiting old friends and workers he had once insulted. Many didn't welcome him, but some listened. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply said thank you and moved on. One evening, he wrote a letter to Noor but never sent it. In it he wrote, I was wrong. I thought wealth was power, but real power is in kindness. And you taught me that. Without saying a word, Samir had stopped going to his office. The building, once filled with staff buzzing with energy, now felt cold and distant. Many employees had resigned over the past few weeks. Some left for better opportunities, while others simply said they couldn't work under someone they didn't believe in anymore. Samir didn't argue with them. He simply watched them go one by one. Every goodbye felt heavier than the last. His company's reputation had dropped, and investors no longer replied to his emails. Even the few who stayed connected with him did so with a sense of formality, not friendship. His lawyer informed him that the environmental case would likely go to court. The penalties could be heavy. Samir sat quietly in his chair, absorbing the weight of his choices. He began spending more time alone, reading old journals, and walking through empty streets at night. He visited his childhood neighborhood again, and stopped by the same garage his father once worked at. The mechanic there was a young boy who looked just like Samir had once looked, greasy hands, hopeful eyes, and a heart full of dreams. Samir stood there for a long time watching the boy work silently. The boy finally looked up and asked, Uncle, do you need help? Samir smiled faintly. No, son, I just needed to remember something. Meanwhile, Noor and Rafiq were busier than ever. Noor had opened a second kitchen in a nearby city. She trained 5 more women who had faced difficult lives. They cooked together, learned together, and shared their journeys with tears and laughter. Noor never let fame distract her. Every new opportunity she received, she turned into a chance to lift someone else. Success means nothing if you stand alone at the top, she often told her team. Rafiq continued helping small businesses grow. He had helped over 20 vendors get proper licenses and funding. Some of them called him Ustad, but all of them called him honest. One day, Noor received a call from a famous university. They were planning a leadership seminar and wanted Noor as the guest of honor. Noor was surprised. Me? I'm not a leader. I just cook. The woman on the phone replied warmly. Ma'am, you lead by feeding hope. That's leadership too. Noor agreed, but asked if she could bring her entire team with her. I didn't reach here alone. I won't stand there alone either. The university welcomed the idea. The seminar date was set. When the news spread, Samir saw it on his phone. He stared at the screen for a long time. He knew the university. It was the same one he had once spoken at years ago when he was at the peak of his career. He had stood on that very stage bragging about wealth and ambition. Now Noor would stand there not with pride, but with purpose. He felt something shift in his chest again, a strange mix of regret and relief. Regret that he had fallen so far. Relief that someone like Noor was rising. Days passed quietly. Samir started writing in a notebook. Not business plans or future goals, but letters. Letters to people he had hurt, some long, some short. Some he would send, some he never planned to. It became his way of clearing his soul. One of those letters was to Rafiq. In it, Samir wrote, I judged you without knowing you. I used power, like a weapon. But you held silence like a shield. You didn't win a fight. You won hearts. That's something I never learned. Rafiq received the letter in the mail. He read it twice, then handed it to Noor. She read it quietly. There was no anger in her eyes, only calm. Do you believe him? Rafiq asked. Noor folded the letter. I believe he's learning, but some lessons take time. Let's not judge his journey. Let's stay on ours. Rafiq nodded. That's why people follow you. The day of the seminar arrived. The auditorium was filled with students, professors, and guests. Noor walked onto the stage with her team, all wearing simple dresses and kind smiles. The hall was silent as Noor stood in front of the mic. She didn't start with facts or numbers. She started with a story. Once there was a man who humiliated me in public. He threw money at me and laughed at my husband. That night I felt small, but I didn't stay small. I rose not to prove him wrong, but to prove myself right. And in doing so I found other women like me who only needed a little light to shine. The crowd listened closely, some wiping their eyes. Noor continued, the world will try to tell you that power is loud, expensive, and untouchable. But real power is soft, steady, and shared. After the seminar ended, the guests slowly left the hall, but Samir stayed in his corner, his back pressed to the wall as he watched Noor and her team speak with students. The joy on their faces was real, and it filled the space like warm sunlight. Samir turned away and walked out quietly. Outside the sky was cloudy, and a soft wind blew. He walked slowly, his steps unsure. He had no driver, no assistant, and no phone calls waiting. For the first time in years, he was alone in the true sense. That evening he went home, sat on the floor, and opened an old wooden box that his mother had left him. Inside were letters, childhood, photos, and a small notebook she once wrote in. He flipped through the pages and found one line underlined twice. Pride builds walls, love builds bridges. He read it over and over again. That night he didn't sleep. He wrote another letter, this time longer than the others. It was addressed to Noor, but it wasn't a letter of apology. It was a confession. The next morning he took the letter, placed it in an envelope, and decided to deliver it himself. He found the address of Noor's new kitchen online and traveled there in a small taxi. When he arrived, the building was modest, clean, and welcoming. Laughter and voices could be heard from inside. He stood outside for several minutes, not knowing whether to knock. Finally, he walked to the door and gently pushed it open. One of the kitchen staff looked up and gasped, slightly recognizing him. Noor was at the far end, kneading dough. When she turned and saw him, her hands paused, but her face didn't change. She wiped her hands and walked toward him. Samir held out the envelope without speaking. Noor took it and looked at him silently. He said softly, "You don't need to read it. Now, I just wanted you to have it." Noor nodded and placed the letter on the counter. There was a moment of silence. Then Samir spoke again. "This place. It's beautiful. It feels alive." Noor gave a small smile. "It's built on stories. That's why." Samir's voice cracked slightly. "I never learned how to build like this. I only learned how to take." Noor looked at him with calm eyes. "We all learn differently. Some late, some early." Samir nodded and stepped back. "Thank you for not hating me." Noor answered quietly, "Hate takes energy I now use to grow." As Samir left, one of the young women working in the kitchen asked, "Who was that?" Noor replied, "Someone who's learning to be better." That evening Noor sat down and read the letter. It was raw, honest, and full of broken sentences. Samir had written about his childhood, his fears, his mistakes, and how that one night in the restaurant changed everything. He wrote, "I thought I was strong because I was feared, but I was only strong when I was kind. You reminded me of that." Noor closed the letter slowly and placed it back in the envelope. Over the next few weeks, Samir started volunteering quietly at an old-age home near his house. He didn't tell anyone. He served food, cleaned the garden, and listened to stories from elders. They didn't know who he was or what he had done. To them, he was just another helper. He found peace in that anonymity. He no longer tried to fix his image, he just wanted to fix himself. Noor's second kitchen was now running smoothly. She had started a free weekend class for girls who wanted to learn cooking and basic finance. Rafiq would visit and teach them how to manage money and register small businesses. The couple had become a symbol of quiet change. A local journalist wrote an article titled "The Couple Who Chose Grace Over Revenge." It went viral. Noor and Rafiq were invited to a national TV talk show. They agreed but requested that the focus remain on the women they worked with, not on their personal story. The host agreed. During the show, the host asked, "You've come a long way from the night you were humiliated. What kept you going?" Noor replied, "Pain is heavy, but purpose makes it lighter. We didn't climb to escape the past. We climbed so we could lift others too." The audience clapped, and Rafiq added, "Success means little if it ends with you. It should begin with you and continue with others." Samir watched the show from his small living room. He didn't cry, but his chest ached. He knew now that he had lost not because Noor won, but because he had walked the wrong road for too long. And now he was just learning how to turn around. One rainy evening, Samir returned to the restaurant where it all began. He sat at the same table again, this time without suit or tie, just a simple shirt and quiet eyes. The waiter came and recognized him. "You're not the same man," the waiter said softly. Samir smiled faintly. "I'm trying not to be." He ordered the same dish he once mocked. When it came, he closed his eyes for a second before taking a bite. It tasted the same, but he didn't. Something inside him had changed. He finished his meal, left a quiet thank you note, and stepped out into the rain. He walked without umbrella, letting the water soak him completely. The sky above was dark, but he didn't feel cold. In fact, for the first time in years, he felt light. Months passed, and the city moved on with its noise, its rush, and its dreams. Noor's name began appearing in magazines and newspapers across the country. She was honored with a national award for empowering women through entrepreneurship. At the ceremony, Noor stood on stage holding the glass trophy as flashes went off. All around her, she looked out at the crowd and saw Rafiq in the front row smiling proudly. Her voice was steady as she spoke. I accept this not just for myself but for every woman who has been told she is not enough. Every hand in my kitchen, every voice behind these meals has built this moment. We didn't win because we fought back. We won because we stood with dignity. The applause that followed was long and heartfelt. After the ceremony, Noor and Rafiq walked out quietly hand in hand. Reporters chased them, but they politely declined interviews. The story is not about us anymore, Rafiq said. It's about the lives we touched. That night they returned home and sat on the rooftop drinking tea under the stars. Noor looked at the sky and whispered, I used to wonder if the pain would ever leave. But now, didn't leave. It changed into something else. Something strong, Rafiq nodded. That's what grace does. Meanwhile, Samir lived a much simpler life now. His house had been sold to pay off fines. He now stayed in a small flat on the edge of town. It was clean and quiet. He worked part-time at a community library and volunteered at the old age home every evening. He no longer wore suits. His clothes were plain and his face had softened. Some days people recognized him, but most didn't. He preferred it that way. He spent his time reading, helping children with studies, and listening more than he spoke. One morning, Samir received a small invitation card. It was from Noor. She was opening her third Nur kitchen and had invited him as a guest. There was no speech expected, no camera waiting. Just a line that said, sometimes healing begins with presence. Samir stared at the card for a long time, then quietly folded it and placed it in his jacket pocket. The day of the opening was sunny and warm. The new kitchen stood in the heart of a working-class neighborhood where most women struggled to find employment. Now they would have a place to cook, to learn, and to earn. The walls were painted in soft pastels with handprints of every woman who had joined Nur over the years. Samir arrived early and stood in the back, watching as families gathered, children laughed and neighbors clapped. Noor stood near the ribbon greeting guests. She saw Samir from afar and nodded. He walked up slowly and they shook hands. You did. Kept your promise, she said. You became better. Samir replied, I still have a long way to go, but this gives me hope. There is no stage, no speeches, just a quiet ribbon cutting by a young girl whose mother was now a part of Noor's team. As the ribbon fell, cheers erupted. Samir felt something swell in his chest. Not pride, something deeper, something peaceful. He spent the day helping serve food, cleaning up plates, and even fixing a broken light in the kitchen. Nobody treated him like a guest. They treated him like one of their own. And for once he didn't mind. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned, Noor sat across from Samir on a bench near the garden. She handed him a small box. You left something behind, she said. Inside was the letter he had written months ago. I read it many times, she said, but I think it's time you read it too. Samir took the letter and opened it. As he read his own words, he felt the tears rise. Not because of guilt, but because of growth. I wanted to destroy you, he said honestly, but I see now that you were never my enemy. My enemy was my own emptiness. Noor didn't speak. She just nodded. As the sun began to set, Samir stood to leave. He turned to Noor and said, if you ever need someone to sweep floors or wash dishes, I'm available. Noor smiled. We don't hire titles here. We welcome hearts. They shook hands again and parted ways quietly. Samir walked home with slow steps. The streets were alive with children playing and neighbors talking. He passed by a mural painted on a wall. It showed a woman holding a plate of food and behind her were faces strong, proud, hopeful. He recognized some of them. He smiled and kept walking. At home he placed the letter back in its envelope and slid it into a drawer. That night he sat by the window and watched the stars. He didn't feel powerful, he didn't feel rich, but he felt real. For the first time in years he felt like a man his mother would be proud of. And somewhere in the city Nur and Rafiq sat, with their team planning the next kitchen. More names, more lives, more light. Their journey wasn't built on revenge.